Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Okay, listeners, welcome back to this week's podcast, the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Jimmy Hinton
and Jimmy's mom, Clara Hinton.
She's back.
I'm back. I'm happy to be back, too.
Well, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
So it's funny because I don't even remember when that was. Was that 2 weeks ago?
Jimmy, you're hurting my feelings.
I know. Who's the old one here, huh?
Yeah, right.
So I think I was in the air on a Wednesday. You were in the air on a Friday. Right. I was going one direction. You were going the other.
Yeah.
And here we all are again.
There we go.
Like a big reunion.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
So, last week, if you guys missed last week's podcast, please go back and listen to it. And I'm not trying to sell our podcasts because, first of all, they're free. But it was really good. It was with guest Sean Doherty, and he was unpacking the Catholic Pennsylvania grand jury report into the Catholic Church. Sean Doherty grew up 20 miles north of us, and he's an abuse survivor from the Catholic Church, and I think he just covered so much incredible stuff, really important stuff in that podcast.
May I interject? I was not part of that interview because
we shut you out.
Yeah, you shut me right out. I was in Haiti at the time visiting with the daughter and son-in-law, but when I returned and I listened, I couldn't stop. I had to listen to it a second time and a third time again. It is that good. I think everyone, this is a must-listen to podcast with Sean. It was excellent. Lots of good information there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff going on, and I clearly there's a major shift in the tide. And one of the things that Sean had said is, if you would have asked me even a year ago if what we survivors are doing out here would force the Pope to be making these public statements and there would be protesters everywhere he goes, he said, I would have said you're dreaming. So I think it just shows that there's power in numbers and there's power in survivors who are finally standing up and just kind of taking back what was taken from them. And so we wanted to walk through a couple examples and just some things that we see that are changing for the good, and kind of let you guys know, I guess, where we're headed and what the next steps are as a nation and really globally.
Right. This is snowballing so fast right now that I think it's beginning to catch some people, including us, a bit off guard with the speed and the momentum of what's happening in a wonderful way. And I think we're going to recap just a little bit and give a few of our thoughts about what's going on and where we think this will go.
Yeah, so one of the really important things is that there's a major change in legislation, and I think this is going to just keep snowballing across the country. I literally just got back from speaking. I spoke at an event, and our state representative was there, and he spoke right after I did, and he addressed the legislation part of what's going on,
right.
And he said there are just so many positive changes just since the Jerry Sandusky trial that happened in 2012 in the state of Pennsylvania.
And when you think about it, that's really fresh on our minds yet, because that was really an awakening. sort of an awakening event that put this abuse on the radar for people.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that our state rep said is, one of the positive things that came out of the Penn State Sandusky scandal was that they really increased the penalties for mandated reporters who don't report. And so he said now, even though there are still people who choose not to report, who are mandated reporters, other people, parishioners, people at school, peers, students, it doesn't matter who, if they know that you had knowledge of abuse and you failed to report, they can report you. You'll be investigated, and then you'll have a criminal record. As a mandated reporter who failed to report, you'll now have a criminal record for the rest of your life. I like that. I think that's awesome.
I love it, Jimmy, and I didn't know to the extent that this law was until talking with you just a few moments ago. When Jimmy came back from this meeting, he was explaining to me what our legislator said about this particular law, and it's a good one. Mm-hmm. It's a good law that we have on the books, and it's one that people need to start taking seriously.
Yeah. I think the other thing, Sean Doherty is one of the ones who's leading the way, and him and several other supporters have rallied together. But they're doing it both in Pennsylvania and New York right now. And that's to get rid of this statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse. Right now, the statute of limitations are horrible in both Pennsylvania and New York. So, for Sean, the example that Sean gave is he was abused from the age of 10 to 13. He had a window until he was age 15. Once he turned 15 years old, he could no longer report. Or he could, but it wouldn't be investigated.
That's horrible.
Because that's right. Our statute of limitations. Right. They're awful.
Horrible.
So, yeah. There's a lot of money being pumped into this by lobbyists to fight this legislation, but I think in the end it's gonna win out. The survivors are gonna win out.
I do too.
And they're not gonna give up until this legislation is passed. So, I think that's a very positive thing, and they're trying to make it retroactive so that people who are abused back in the 2000s and 90s and 80s and 70s, they can actually open up investigations. They can report their abuse and open up an investigation. So,
Jimmy, how do you feel about this? Do you think this is going to be overload? We talked a little bit about this prior to our podcast. Do you think it's too much, or do you think this is a really good thing to remove that statute of limitations?
It's a double-edged sword. I think for the survivors, it's a very good thing. I think for the abusers, it's a very good thing. You're going to have a lot of people who, even though they're not prosecuted for a whole number of reasons. One, our system is just it's overloaded.
It's overloaded and weak in that area. Yeah, there's just
our law enforcement they're just way understaffed and overworked. All the way down to our social workers, people at Children and Youth, all the people who are involved in investigating these crimes, they're completely overburdened and understaffed.
And that's why I asked this question to you, because right now they're overburdened. Can you imagine when this statute of limitations
it would be unbearable.
Removed? Yeah, right.
But I think the good news is even if you're not getting convictions, you're having abusers who are really shaking in their boots. And we know that right now. We know that abusers are shaking in their boots, and they're being completely caught off guard by this. And
I love that fact.
Yeah.
I truly do. I truly do. When I think about how so much abuse was done, and then they go on, these abusers, and live this pretty tidy little life, so they think.
Yeah, while they keep creating victims.
And create more and more because they think they're safe.
Sure.
They think they thought they were untouchable until now.
Yeah, I think, one of the questions that Sean was asked by the national media was, how do you feel right now? Because your abuser, under current Pennsylvania law, can't be convicted. You know that he's guilty, and he'll never spend a day in prison. Mm-hmm. And Sean said, I'm completely at peace with that because his name is out there. People know what he did.
Right.
And he said that to be able to have that written in a report that's out there for general consumption forever, he said, that brings great peace to my life.
Amen that. I think that is powerful right there.
Yeah.
A powerful healing tool for those survivors of abuse. Mm-hmm. Just to know that, just that part. So, okay.
And I think that's going to happen all over the place. Right now, the state of Missouri, they just opened up a statewide investigation into the Catholic Church. One of the major weaknesses is that they don't have subpoena power like what Pennsylvania does. So that changes from state to state.
Right.
Our Attorney General's office had subpoena power, so they could go in and they could steal the records. Mm-hmm. They subpoenaed the records. The Catholics didn't have a choice. They had to give up the records. In Missouri, the Attorney General's office doesn't have subpoena power. And so I watched an interview with the Attorney General yesterday, and they said, basically, you're relying on these Catholic bishops and the cardinals, to self-report. And they said, does that trouble you that they're not going to self-report?
Oh, sure.
And he said, absolutely not, because he said if they choose not to hand records over willingly to the Attorney General's office, we can then publish their names, and we can say Bishop so-and-so has refused to willingly hand over records, and so let the public. Oh, absolutely.
That casts a very ugly light.
Absolutely, it
casts
does.
a very
because it
ugly light.
It implies they have something to hide.
If we have nothing to hide, we'll graciously hand over whatever it is.
So it's a lose-lose right now for people whose hands are guilty. I mean, it's not a good time.
No,
for abusers,
for them,
and for the people who covered it up,
right,
willingly and knowingly. Right. So I think legislation it's going to change for the good. I think another thing is a lot of things are being put in place to help people who are survivors who've been traumatized. I can't say enough good things about a lot of our local agencies and the people who tirelessly work on behalf of victims and survivors of child sexual abuse. I mean,
I will amen that.
They're your common people who generally get no recognition.
Right.
And they are the heroes to the survivors.
They are.
Because they're the ones on the ground, they're boots on the ground, and they're providing all kinds of services that the general public has no clue.
Right.
These people are even out there, and they're just great, great people. So I think we're going to see an increase of that. Pennsylvania, when it was sued by the state of Pennsylvania, I call it a state. There are people out there who are probably cringing. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. When we sued Penn State, how many millions of dollars do you remember?
No,
something like
exorbitant millions.
I'm going to say like $50 million or something.
I can't remember.
Penn State was sued, and they had to use every single penny of that to pump back into organizations within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are working with survivors. And that's an incredible stipulation to the lawsuit.
It is, and I love that. I think that was a wise stipulation,
Yeah, so it wasn't like we're just going to sue you because you made bad decisions.
No.
It's we're going to sue you, and because you made bad decisions, you're going to be forced to do right by your bad decisions.
I love that. I think that's an example of the law at work, working in such a good way to help our victims and survivors of abuse. I love that.
But I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Just, our legislatures are listening to survivors, and that's not happened
ever before.
For decades.
Ever. I've been doing so much reading, Jimmy, about past history, and survivors have been shoved under the rug and there have been holes dug and they've been shoved in them to quiet them. They have not been heard at all. This is a wonderful time for us to be seeing this awakening, this awareness, this education, and the good things that are being put into place. I'm so thankful about that.
Well, even what happened today, I got to speak to a group of over 100 people, and one of those was our state representative, a legislator. And I think 2 years ago, I never would have had him sitting in my audience. I didn't even know he was going to be there today, to be honest. And I just thought, that's really cool. Like, I was sitting right beside him, and
he knows you. He knows who you are. He knows your history. He knows what you're about, and you're working with him. It's great.
People are listening.
Yeah.
People are listening,
it's
and they, it's just a good time.
It is.
It's a good time to be
Part
continuing.
Of this.
Yeah. And just moving forward, pressing forward. We have some notes here, and one of the questions is: will legislation be state by state, or more on a federal level? Honestly, I think the laws will be state by state. And my opinion is that they should remain at the state level. I think there are some good federal laws that regulate abuse and how we respond to abuse.
Right.
But I think the federal government's fairly limited. And I think that's a good thing, because I think your local representatives get to know your survivors, and they build legislation based on what you need within your community.
I was hoping you'd say that. Jimmy and I didn't really
there's no one size fits
this
all
at length prior to, and I totally agree with you, Jimmy. On a federal level, there's a detachment. On a statewide level,
and there's
personal interaction.
Sure.
And legislation will be built around that, which is a very good thing. We have the federal to overall protect, but we need that state level.
Yeah. And I mean, the federal government, to their credit, I mean, they're listening too. And people like Ashton Kutcher spoke before the Senate, and people are listening.
They are more than listening. They're talking about it now. It's a buzz. A few years back, it was rare to hear anything about abuse. Now it's daily, and we expect to hear about it.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk about what we wanted to see on more of a personal level. Since we know that the tide is changing, what are some changes that we would like? So you and I guess this is more for our listeners to kind of hear where we're coming from.
Absolutely.
So what are some things that we would like to see, top priorities, and then kind of for the survivors, does pedophiles and whatever kind of abusers they are, so whether it's domestic violence or pedophile or rapist, does them going to prison bring a sense of satisfaction? Is that what we should be fighting for? What are some of the things that we would like to see and that we think other people, based on what we hear from survivors, would like to see happen? So I don't know. We were talking about this a little bit before this episode, and we think that really varies widely from individual to individual, survivor to survivor. There is no one size fits all. And not to be a spoiler alert, but that's going to be our truth bomb.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to see happen is for there to be survivors listening to this saying, well, my goodness, I haven't spoken up yet, and I don't know that I ever can.
Right.
And so I'm not one of these shakers that's out there helping and making a difference. Please listen very carefully. Yes, you are making a difference. You don't have to be somebody who's out there and out front and public and outing your abuser and, saying their name out loud and putting your name and your face out there. You don't have to be one of those people to make a difference.
Absolutely. That's not for everyone.
No.
Thank God for the ones that can do that. Thank God for the Sean Dohertys that can stand up, and he's eloquent of speech. He truly is. He's wonderful. Thank God for the Jimmy Hintons who can go speak to groups of 100 or 1,000 and can educate. That's not everybody's cup of tea.
Well, Jules Woodson talked about this 2 weeks ago, too.
Right.
She said...
She did a marvelous job
also. She said for her, it was a personal decision to name her abuser by name publicly.
Right.
And she knew that by doing so, she would have to show her face. Excuse me. And she would have to have her name out there. She would be on, in the spotlight.
She knew no insight as to how much she was going to be in the public eye, but she knew she was going to.
Yeah.
But that was her choice.
Right. And she said, she gets phone calls and emails from people, from other survivors, and they'll say things like, I don't feel like I could ever out my abuser publicly. I don't want their name to be public because their name being public means my name is public.
Right.
To which her response was, that's fine. That's
totally
a personal,
fine.
Absolutely. That's a personal decision that's deeply personal. And, so we want survivors to know, just because you're not out front and center like some of us are, doesn't mean that you're any less important whatsoever. Just because you're not outing your abuser by name doesn't mean that you're any less significant or that you're making any less change within this big system. You are making a difference.
Yes. I feel we are all a collective voice, and that collective voice, whatever it is, if you're working with legislation, if you're educating, if you are a listener to those who have been abused, whatever your position is.
Or if you're in your own church or your own home and you're doing nothing more but being more vigilant, you're making a difference.
If you are a prayer warrior and you are daily praying about this, petitioning God to help this, you are part of this tidal wave. That you helped create it. You are part of it. And Jimmy and I just want to get that across to every survivor of abuse, to not feel this burden of guilt if you are not out there up front and center naming your abuser, or if that's something you can't do, because many cannot. It would re-traumatize over and over again to many.
Yeah, absolutely. So we said for some of you, you may be at peace in gardening. Maybe therapy is not for you. Maybe you can't afford therapy. Be at peace with that. If gardening is your thing and that's where you find peace and solitude, then go out to your garden and garden and do it with excellence.
Right.
If jogging is where you find peace and where you find comfort, and that helps you to recenter and to be able to spend to spend quality time with your kids or your grandkids, then go out jogging and be at peace with that.
Absolutely.
There is no one size fits all.
No.
And
no.
I kind of wanted to jump to this because I think this is important. Really, it's the final question. What do you and I see as the next step in keeping the pendulum swinging in the right direction? So you had mentioned, right now there's this pendulum that took a dramatic turn in the opposite direction.
Sure did.
Hard and fast.
Real hard and real
and
fast.
So,
surprising all of us, really.
What's the next step to keep that pendulum swinging and swinging because any extreme ends up being anti-progress.
Right.
So you can have extremists where they're so passionate and so vocal that everybody runs from them.
Right.
And we don't want to be those people.
No.
In the words of In the words of my wife sometimes, stop scaring people.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We don't want to scare people.
Right. No. We see it in our political arena. People are getting crazy. We don't want that.
There's a guy this morning that just drove his pickup truck through the building of Fox News down in affiliate down in Dallas and was
what
ranting.
Does that prove? Right.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Don't be an extremist.
No.
So how do we keep this moving in a positive direction? What's the next step? I would circle back to whatever it is that you're doing right now, wherever you are, and however God has gifted you, just keep doing it and do it with excellence. So if it's being the protective grandmother at your church who doesn't want to tell anybody about your past abuse, but you're going to be vigilant on the back pew, and if somebody's doing something that crosses a boundary, and you're going to step in on behalf of the kid or on behalf of a vulnerable adult. Yeah. If you're that grandma sitting on the back pew and that's where you are and that's where God has gifted you, keep doing it and do it with excellence.
Absolutely.
If you're one of the people who's banging on the steps of your capital's building in your state and you're talking with legislatures, if that's not my gift, I've not been to Harrisburg yet.
No.
That doesn't mean that I don't care about
James.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that I don't care about the laws that are being formed. It just means it's not my gift. It's not my thing.
Right.
But if you are one of those people, keep doing it. Do it with excellence.
Absolutely.
If you're somebody who trains churches or consults with them, like that's my sweet spot. Keep doing it. Do it with excellence.
I like that you're saying do it with excellence. You don't need to kill yourself.
No.
You don't
take
need
time to rest. Take time to
exert
breathe,
yourself
process.
to the point of exhaustion. You don't need to get yourself in a tizzy and worked up and have a nervous breakdown. You need to do what your gift is and do it with excellence and
pace yourself.
Right.
I think that's one of the other things. The burnout rate in the advocacy realm is unprecedented, and anybody who's listening gets it. If you've worked in any kind of advocacy work, you know that it's unrewarding, it's exhausting, it takes a toll on your family, it takes a toll on your soul.
It does.
It makes you an angry person if you're not in check.
Right, you need to guard against that.
You start making mistakes, and it can drain you. It can suck you dry. I think that's the
biggest thing, Jimmy, that I would say about this pendulum now that it's swinging. We want to keep an equilibrium to it. We want to keep it balanced.
Yeah.
I think of your dad, and I will get personal with this. When we separated, his abuse of children escalated. I don't know the reason why you've talked to him. I have not. I don't know if he's ever disclosed to you. We didn't know what he was doing at that point in time, but he went what I would call kind of crazy off the beaten path. He was keeping children overnight with him in his apartment. He had never done that before. I mean, we together never did anything like that. He was babysitting all kinds of children, driving 100 miles or more to babysit a child. Things that were so odd and crazy to us. He became imbalanced in his energy, so to speak, of the freedom that he now had. I think while he was living with me, he had to watch himself, really keep things in check. Then he went crazy. All full out crazy. Well, our pendulum is swinging right now in a great way. Legislation will be changed. Subpoenas are being, the Catholic Church is being opened up, the books, the archives, people are being convicted, all of that. We need to keep equilibrium in that. And I think we need to use reasoning and just stick together as we have and not just go off on a crazy beaten path, like you said, and drive our truck through some wall or something.
No, I mean, really. People are going insane. And look at, on the political level, people are so convicted about, you name it, in politics.
Right. It's just to the point of senseless.
They're nuts and they're hateful.
Right. And we don't want,
Even if it's a good cause that you're, a good humanitarian cause that you're fighting for, people are acting like idiots.
Right.
And that doesn't help change things for the as a society.
Right. No, and I like that you said people, we don't want to become hateful. When we were talking about earlier, what is it that we think the victims/survivors of abuse really want? Well, number one, they want to be heard, and that's happening now. Number two, I think every survivor of abuse would like to see their abuser have some kind of reckoning with what they did.
Yes.
Yes,
that's huge.
It is really big just to hear an "I am sorry" type of thing.
And to mean it.
And mean it, sincerely mean it. And I love what was done with Penn State. And I had, part of what I would love to see is when there is a conviction, or even if there isn't strong enough evidence for that full conviction, I'd love to see the abuser have to monetarily pay some kind of something towards, like what you were saying, a good cause, or towards therapy for the person who was abused, towards mental health issues in your local community, whatever it is, but something that they will contribute, that they have to. That would give me a bit of peace.
Yeah, if there was some kind of a fine where, I mean, think about, I think about our house, right? So we have an escrow account.
Right.
Our state has all kinds of escrow accounts for all kinds of different things.
Right.
And I think, that would be a really cool thing to see, an escrow account on a state level. I
had not even thought of that.
Where people who don't get convictions are fined, and that money goes into that escrow account to help fund this stuff.
To help fund all
instead
these
of using
programs,
taxpayer money.
Right.
Find the people, make people take responsibility for what they've done.
That's it.
And our justice system may not be able to convict them, and that sometimes that happens.
And sometimes it happens. They get off,
but they can find them.
Right. I would love to see that.
Yeah,
I truly would.
But I think I think another thing along those lines is this is one that I see in the church. We need to not feel bad when people who are guilty carry shame. We need to allow them to feel shame. Not the victims,
right?
The abusers.
The abusers.
We have this flipped where we put all the shame on the survivors. And I just had, recently, I had a church that I reached out to. And I said, here's a person who you guys know is in your church. Here's the record. I've looked it up myself. Really, really bad. I mean, very bad. Sexually violent predator. Just horrible, horrible. In fact, you and I have talked about it, and you actually know the abuser.
Yes, I do.
So in that case, the message that I received back, and I'll say this publicly, I'm not going to call the church out by name right now because I'll give them time to respond better.
Okay.
But the response that I got back was, and I quote, "We don't require any of our members to carry their past sins on their sleeves publicly, no matter what they've done." That's the biggest load of crap that I've ever heard in my life.
It is.
When
horrible.
People have blatantly raped children against that child's will, which is always, if you're a minor by definition,
cover up for that.
To do that,
right.
Let that person carry public shame.
Right. I
because
totally agree.
Honestly, it's shame that causes us to repent.
Right.
Were it not for shame, why would we repent?
We wouldn't. We wouldn't
We'd have
feel
no
a
reason
need to.
No.
We would have no need.
And if we allow shame to fall on the shoulders where it belongs, and publicly let them carry that shame, that helps keep people in check, and it keeps them accountable. Where everybody knows what they did, it's no secret, it's no surprise. Right. Parents are now armed with knowledge, so they stand a fighting chance to protect their kids against known abusers. Yep. Let people carry shame who are oppressors.
Weird? The scriptures teach that, but we don't follow it.
Yeah. That's right.
Isn't that sad?
That's right.
It is. It's sad.
So I think honestly, that's one of the most important.
That's critical.
Things and gifts that we could give to survivors.
Really
is
critical.
let people who should carry shame, let them carry their own shame.
Huge, Jimmy. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. Thank you.
So, I guess we'll end with a truth bomb. Point blank, there is no one size fits all. You do whatever it is that brings you personal peace, and do that with excellence. So if that's sitting right where you're at and you just can't talk about what happened to you with anybody but your dog, talk to your dog and do it with excellence. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you've been gifted with, be at peace with that and do it with excellence. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode, and we'll catch you next round. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.